Hey class, I'm going to cover chapter 28 in this video. So the federal budget for the tools of fiscal policy. Now this is a very straightforward chapter. There's not much concept, not much calculation, just the pure definitions. So I'm going to go through this fairly quickly. Okay. All right. So let's get started. So some big questions here. So how do governments spend money? And then how does government tax our money? And then what is the budget deficit? So first, let's look at our government budget. So for our government budget, that every year we're collecting a lot of money from our citizens, and every year we're spending a lot of money for the country. So every time you hear this term called a budget deficit, that means if any year if your spending is more than your government income, that's a budget deficit. Now for individual consumers, you're gonna have your own deficit too. So every month, if you're spending more than what you have, that's a deficit. So in 2001-2005, our deficit was about $300 billion per year. Now that is a lot of money. But in 06-08, it increased to $700 billion per year. And then by 2009, our deficit was $1.4 trillion per year. So this number has been growing quickly in the early 2000s. And then ever since the recession was over back in about 2013, 2014, our budget deficit has been slowly to decreasing. But now since President Trump introduced a new tax cut last year, our budget deficit might increase again this year. Okay, but is this really bad? Is the budget deficit killing our economy? Let's look at this. Let's see how this actually affects our economy. So for our budget deficit, government spend a lot of money. Every year we're getting money from government through taxes. So whenever you guys pay your income tax, whenever you pay your FICA tax, that's your deduction of your paycheck, those are all going to the government. And then they're also spending a lot of money. And then for all the government spending, they're called outlay. It's also known as spending. So money going out, that's an outlay. And then income and revenue, those are money coming into the government. So for our government here, typically we're spending about $3 trillion per year for the last, I want to say 7 to 8 years now, and then that's about $10,000 per citizen. Now that's a lot of money, but we do spend this money in many categories, so such as your defense department, your educations, your highways, your social security, your Medicare. So for all those spending, we're spending about $10,000 per person. And I also know what's a transfer payment. So transfer payment is anytime our government giving out money for free with no string attached. So for example, your social security, your welfare benefit, your Medicare, those are all transfer payment, because for those benefit, those are free benefit. Our government are not asking for anything in return. That we don't ask those people to hold a sign that says government's good on the highway, right? So people do that still, but that's not for different. That's for different reasons. But for this type of benefit here, those are free benefit. They're called transfer payment. So for our government outlay, they're equal to the total spending by the government plus our transfer payment. So how much money our government spending on buying good, plus how much free money we're giving away, that's our total government outlay. And then for our outlay versus spending, so spending is anytime our government buys goods or service. So when our government buys a new airplane, when they buy a new computer, when they hire new workers, those are government spending. And then transfer payment, again, this is just free money given to people. So such as Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, those are free money. Okay, and then for our government revenue, this is collected through taxes. Okay, so this can be your income tax, your corporate income tax, your FICA tax, but your sales tax. Sales tax is not part of it, because for sales tax, this is for local and state government, not federal government. So for federal government, there is no sales tax. Now we also have other fees, such as your national park admission fee, but those are very small. So this, even though they're part of government revenue, but to be honest with you, every year how much money we're collecting for the government park service is not enough to cover the expenses for national parks. So that's just a tiny amount. Okay, we can ignore that. All right. So for our government outlay, how much money we're spending out. So this number has been increasing steadily for the last 40 to 50 years until you see over here this huge jump. That was our recession, and after recession was over, our spending goes down a little bit. Okay. So for our spending for the government, there are two categories. There's a mandatory spending and also something called a discretionary spending. So mandatory spending means they have to spend money by law on these programs. The beneficiary for these programs, is also called entitlement program. That those beneficiary, they're entitled for the money by law. And their Social Security, by law, will have to pay them. Medicare, by law, will have to pay them. Okay, and then the other one is called discretionary spending. Those government have control over them. So okay, they spend more or less with no law attached. So spending such as your road, your bridges, your defense, your how many workers we hire for the government, those is up to the government. They can either spend more money or less money, and they're called discretionary spending. And then for you guys, you can think about this your own spending too. You probably have your own spendings that can be divided into two categories. What is the mandatory spending? What is the discretionary spending? Right. So your rent, your phone bill, your car payment, those become mandatory spending because you had to spend money on them. But you're spending on, let's say, your movie theaters, your games, your music, those are discretionary. That we don't have to spend those money. It's really up to our discretion to spend it more or less. Okay. All right. So for our mandatory spending, every year, it's roughly about 60% of our government spending is on mandatories. So Medicare, the biggest component, and also your welfare, your unemployment benefit, they're part of it too. And then your everything else, your discretionary spending is about 34%, and then interest is about 7%. Now this is the interest we paid on our national debt. So for the $21 trillion we borrow from all different places, we don't ever pay the money back, but we do pay for is the interest on those debt. So in 2012, that's accounted for about 7% of our total government spending. Now this number will increase because as the more money we borrow, the more interest is going to pay back. Okay. Now here are some historical numbers for our shares of government spending. As you can see, defense spending has been decreasing ever since the end of the Cold War, and then your Social Security has been increasing, your Medicare has been increasing. Okay, so those are some big categories in there. Now, Social Security is a government program that's set up in 1935 by President FDR as part of the New Deal. It was set up to help retired people, to guarantee everybody who's retired with a minimum income for retirement. So for Social Security, now, this is probably the biggest component of our government spending. It is the biggest component of our government spending. But you might probably heard this before, that Social Security is on the verge of bankruptcy. The reason why, because the law or the program was set up in 1930s. But today, almost 80 years later, that is inefficient to address some of the social issues in our country. So one problem we have is that the people, the average age is older now, so there are more people going into retirement and less people working. And also people live longer in retirement, so they need more money too. So in the old days, in 1930s, when this Social Security was first set up, there were few retirees, so less number who retired, and then more people in the labor force to pay into the system, and then the Social Security tax was only 2%. And then back then, how much we're paying into the system is more than how much we're getting money out of the system. So we had a positive balance. So every year at the end of the year, if you look at the Social Security Administration's their current account, there's a surplus on it. They were paying too much of it, and then some money I carry over the next year. But as the population getting older, there are more people, especially the baby boomers, that are now going into retirement. By the way, if you don't know who the baby boomers are, they're anybody who was born between 1945 to about 1965. The reason why they're called baby boomers is that during the war, during World War II, many of the soldiers was drafted into the army. They were sent overseas. So when they come back from the war, they start to settle down. getting education, getting a job, getting career going, and also getting families. So they get really busy. Okay, so for this busy process, we got more baby born during those years. So for anybody who were born between 1945 to 1965, we call them baby boomers. There is a huge portion of populations who are in this category. Now, if you look at the numbers here, for anybody who was born in 1945, today they're in retirement, right? So there are more people going into retirement, less people working, and our Social Security tax has been increased to 15.3%, way higher than before. But even with this 15.3%, how much we pay into the system is less than how much we're getting out of the system. Every year, there is a negative balance on Social Security. So our government must pull money from elsewhere to supplement our payment on Social Security. Okay, now there are different solutions for it. This is up to you to think about, what is good, what is bad, and should we continue this program, or should we just increase our tax, or what government has been doing for the last maybe 15 years or so, is to delay our retirement age. So back then, you can retire as early as 15.8, and then become 62, and then become 65, and now 67. So by the time you retire, it might be like 75. So you might never see the money anyway. Okay, because this system currently we have a negative balance, that we don't have enough money for everybody to retire early. That's why people need to wait for retirement. And then next, Medicare. So Medicare is a health insurance program set up for retirees. So this was established back in 1965 by President Lyndon Johnson. The first beneficiary, so Medicare ID number 000001, was a guy named Harry Truman. So Harry Truman, you have to remember, was the president after FDR. Now Harry Truman, he was pretty, compared to all the other presidents, Harry Truman was fairly poor. So by 1960s, he was already having a hard time paying for his own medical bill, and our government noticed this, that if it's hard for our own ex-president to pay for the medical bill, then what about everybody else, right? So that's why we set up Medicare. So Medicare was set up to pay for the health care expenses for retirees once they reach retirement age. Now, for Social Security and Medicare, they face the same problem that people live longer today. They rely more on retirement funding, rely more on healthcare, and healthcare is more expensive than what it was before 1960s. So with all this funding challenge, those two programs, both of them programs, they're on the verge of bankruptcy. Okay, so one chart you can look at it, two chart over here. The first one shows you the percentage of our population that's in retirement. So there are more people going into retirement compared to 1960s and 1930s, and then people tend to stay in retirement because our life expectancy is longer now. People live longer. So today, in 2018, the number is about 13% of the population that's in retirement. Now, however, with more people retired, less people working, that this funding challenge here is a problem. That for both of the programs, for Social Security and then also for Medicare, they're funded primarily by people who are working now. So workers who are working now, they're paying the FICA tax, FICA. Okay, that's supposed to be an A. So FICA. So this is your social insurance tax. You know how every time you you get your paycheck and it's always a little less than what you're expecting? That's because the FICA tax. Okay, that's used to pay for Social Security and then social insurance, which is your Medicare. Now today that's 15.3% of your, oh my God, I can't write, 15.3% of your income. Now, this depends on what kind of job you have. If you're a full-time employee, this is usually paid half and half. So employers pays half, you pay half. But if you're a contractor, you pay the entire 15.3% all by yourself. Okay. So this system worked in 1960s. It was about every 5 worker for every 1 beneficiary. So you have 5 people working and then one person getting a benefit. But as the people getting older and older and they're going into retirement, less people working, this number is becoming about 2.9 workers for every 1 beneficiary. And then in about 10, 12 years, this will become 2.2 workers for every 1 beneficiary. So more people working, more people retired, less people working, that this number 15.3 will probably be increased, or we're gonna delay our retirement age and then make sure everybody don't retire at all. So you're gonna work until maybe like 78 or 80. Okay. All right, so for our first beneficiary for Social Security, ID number 00000001 was a lady named Ada Fuller. So for Ms. Fuller here, she was the first beneficiary for Social Security. She paid $24 into the system, and then by the time she died, when she was 100 years old, she got a total of over $22,000 out of the system. So that's an example of why the system might be breaking down right now, because people are staying in retirement longer than before. They're spending more money from Social Security and Medicare, and that's why there's a funding challenge for it. There's a negative balance. All right, so other issues we have to talk about is we have seen an increase in defense spending since the September 11, 2001. So back in 2001, our defense spending was only 16% of budget, and then by 2010 become 19%, and then for the last 10 years or so, it hovers about 20% of total spending. But since we're finishing the war in Iraq, in Afghanistan, those numbers should come down slowly. Okay, and also whenever there's a recession, so economy slows down, government tend to spend more money. So in 2007, before recession, we're spending about $2.87 trillion. And then by 2009, we're spending about $3.58 trillion. Now, a couple reasons why that is, because with recession, you have more people relying on social benefit programs. So such as, Medicare, Social Security, or even your unemployment benefit. So those tend to increase our government spending by a lot. All right, let's look at the next chart. So this shows you how much our government outlay was from 1990 to 2010. Again, notice the huge jump over here. That was our recession spending. So anytime there's a recession, government tend to spend more money, and then we tend to collect less tax revenue, and then your budget deficit always goes up during recession. Okay. Now, so next, how do our government collect money? So we collect money primarily through tax. Now, this tax, over 80% of tax are paid by individual people, so taxpayers. So there are people in the economy. Now, you're going to pay your income tax, your FICA tax, but there are also other tax sources. There's much smaller. So corporate tax, normally it's about 9 to 10% of total government tax revenue. Estate and gift tax. By the way, estate tax is also known as the death tax. That once you die, you must pay a tax. Okay, excess tax, that's a user fee. Custom tax, that's a tariff. So, but all this is pretty small compared to how much our individual pays, which is about 80% of our government tax revenue. Now, this pie chart here will show you just how much percentage each category is. So, your individual income tax in 2014 was 46% of our government income. Social insurance tax, that's your FICA, that's your Medicare, your Social Security, so that's a 34%. So together, these two categories here by individual people, we pay 80% of our government tax revenue. Companies only pay 11%, and everything else accounting for 9%, so much smaller. Now, for our tax system, we have what is called a progressive tax system. That means the more income you pay, the more income you have, the lower percentage. Well, how do I put this? The more income you pay, the smaller average tax rate you pay. Okay, so the more income you have, the smaller average tax rate you pay. Okay, so to find the average tax rate, use your tax, how much tax you paid, divided by income. That will show you how much your average tax rate is. So let me show you an example of our tax bracket. So this was 2014. So this shows you just for how much income you have, how much tax you pay. Now for this tax bracket, it doesn't mean the entire income pays according to this percentage. So let's say that if your income is somewhere between 36,000 and 89,000, this 25%, it doesn't mean the entire income pays 25%. It means that portion of the income pays 25%. So this tax rate is also called the marginal tax rate. So for additional income, how much tax do you pay? And then from this tax rate, we can see how much, we can see why our system is called a progressive tax system. Okay, so let me show you an example. Okay. Hey guys, I think I made a mistake when I tell you what the progressive rate is. So progressive means the more income you make, the higher percentage you pay. I think I might say lower percentage. My bad. Okay, so it should be the more income you make, the higher percentage you pay. And then there are two more. One's called regressive. So regressive says the more income you make, the lower percentage you pay. And then we have something called proportional. So proportional says the more income you make, you pay the same percentage. That's called proportional. Okay, so let me show you how this works. Let's suppose we have a person. Let's do a tax table first. So tax rate, or let's call this marginal tax rate. And then let's do our tax bracket. So lower level, and then upper level. All right, so let's do 10%. We're gonna do very simple numbers. Okay, so 15% and then 20%, just suppose. And then let's suppose for your first $10,000, you pay a 10% tax rate. For the portion between 10,000 to 25,000, you pay a 15% rate. And then from 25,000 above, you pay a 20% rate. Okay, so let's suppose a person's income is gonna be, let's say, $30,000. Now let's see how much tax this person will pay. Now remember, this tax rate is called marginal tax rate. So it doesn't mean the entire $30,000 pays a 20% tax. It means the additional amount of income above this 25,000, you're gonna pay a 20% tax rate. So let me show you how this works. So you're gonna take our $30,000, go through the entire tax bracket. So for the first level, for your first 10,000, you pay a 10% rate. So we're gonna do 10,000 minus the lower bound times the 10%. So that's a $1,000. And then for the next level, from 10,000 to 25,000, we'll pay a 15% rate. So again, we take the upper bound, subtract the lower bound, and then times the percentage. That's a 2250. Okay, and the last one for the 30,000. Now again, that's our income, so it doesn't mean the entire 30,000 pays a 20%. It just means from 25,000 to 30,000, you pay 20%. Okay, so this would be your 30,000 minus 25,000 times 20%. Oh, too much. There, that's how much you paid. Okay, so this the total tax paid for this person. So tax paid will be the total of all three levels here. So that's how much this person paid. And then the average tax rate. So for the average tax rate, we're going to take how much the tax this person paid divided by this person's income. So it's $30,000. And that's about 14.17%. Now, let's suppose the person's income is not this much. Let's suppose the person's income, let's do another person's income for $20,000. So for 20,000, again, it goes through the first bracket. So the upper bound, which is 10,000, minus the lower bound, and then times 10%. Now, for the second bracket, now the upper bound is 25,000, but we don't make 25,000, we want to make 20,000. So we're going to do the 20,000, the income, minus the lower bound, 10,000, because because we're saying that from 10,000 to the current income of 20,000, this will pay a 15% rate. Okay, so times 15%. And the second level. Now, we don't go to the next level because this person doesn't make anything more than 25,000. So the total tax paid for this person would just be, I believe there'll be 2,500. And then the total tax paid, so tax paid would be, tax rate would be the tax paid 2,500 divided by the income 20,000. So that'll be about 12.5%. So notice how for this person who's making 30,000, they pay almost 14% average rate, but person making 20,000 pays a 12% average rate. So the more money you make, the more percentage you pay. That's called a progressive tax system. Okay, but if it's reversed, that's called regressive. So most of the tax income tax in the world, they all have this progressive tax system. So the more money you make, the even more percentage you pay for income tax. That's called progressive tax system. Now the highest right now is 39.6%. But if you compare it to the historical numbers, it's not that high, because in the old days, especially in 1945, our highest rate was 94%. Now, what that means if you make $1 more, you keep 6 cents for yourself, and you pay 94 cents for tax. Okay, that's a 94% sales tax, a 94% marginal income tax. Now, it doesn't mean that everybody pays 94%. So I believe the number was that for any portion of your income that was above $250,000, for anything more than that, you pay 94%. Most people in 1945 didn't make that much money, so very few people actually pay that much tax. All right, so this shows you our historical highest marginal tax rate. So right now it's not as high. Historically speaking, it's pretty low. Okay. Now this chart here shows you that for all the revenue for the government, how much is it from different income group. So for the top 20% of Americans, they paid about 70% of all the taxes to the government. The top 1% Americans, they paid about like 25% of the total government revenues. Now, the reason why those rich people pay more money to the government tax revenue, because our tax system is based on something called an ability to pay principle. That we're gonna charge your tax based on your ability to pay for it. So the more money you make, the better ability you have to pay for the tax. Therefore, you're gonna pay a higher tax. But the less money you make, the lower ability you have to pay for the tax, the lower tax you pay. That's why if you look at this, the bottom 20% almost pays nothing to the government, right? They have a lower ability, therefore they will pay a lower amount of income to tax. Now, government budget deficit is anytime your outlay is more than revenue. So this has been happening for many years for U.S. government. Budget surplus is anytime your revenue is more than outlay, so you're actually saving money. So for all the years we have in the U.S., in the recent U.S. histories, for the last 50 years, we only had 3 years of budget surplus. Every other year is all budget deficit, and those 3 years, it was when Clinton was in office. Okay, so the economy was very good. We had a budget surplus. All right, so there you go. That's just 3 years of budget surplus. So, but you see every other year that your outlay is more than your revenue, so that'll be a deficit. Okay, so deficit, and then budget surplus, and a huge deficit in 2009. All right, so we talk about this. Now your deficit can grow based on how much money government spend. So if your outlay is more, deficit grow bigger. If your revenue is less, deficit grow bigger. So during recession, both happen, then deficit get much bigger. Because during recession, people use more government benefit and also less people working. So less people working, then our revenue goes down, and then both together, that will increase your deficit during the recession years. Now, your deficit is not the debt. So deficit is your annual deficit. So from year to year, how much money we're spending more than our income, the deficit. Your debt is your overall deficit altogether. So you take your deficit from year 1, add it to year 2, year 3, year 4. Altogether, there's a total debt. There's a website. It's called usdebtclock.org. So if you guys go on there, you can see how much is our national debt after the current second. So it's actually pretty accurate, even though it's an estimate, but it's pretty accurate, show you how much money we owe. And then for the time you're watching this video, for the 30 minutes you spend on this video, our debt will probably increase by about $5 to $7 million. Okay, so the number is increasing. Now, for other debt we have, the part of that is held by the government. Part of that is held by the public, so individuals. So the biggest owner of our government debt is the Social Security Office. Now, so this is what happens. That our government will borrow money from itself. So anytime we're short on money, we borrow money from the Social Security Office. So if you look at our debt distributions, so at your Social Security Office, your government pension programs, they are some of the biggest debt owners of U.S. government debt. This shows you your debt to GDP ratio. So for US, our debt is about 100% of GDP. It's pretty high. It's higher than most countries in the world, but it's not the highest. So the highest, you have your Japan, who is over 200% of GDP ratio. Greece is more than 150%. So these two countries here, or these three countries, Greece, actually there's 4 countries here. Greece, Italy, Portugal, and Ireland. During the recession, during 2008, 2009, they all had a problem with debt. That those countries was almost on the verge of bankruptcy because they're owing too much money. So U.S. we're not there yet, but we're coming close. Okay, we're getting close. We're getting closer. So for all the debt we have, 67% of the debt are held domestically. So your individual investors, your banks, your investment companies, your even regular companies, they're holding on to 67% of our national debt. And then your overseas agencies, so other government, other companies, holding on to 33% of our national debt. Now, the reason why the U.S. companies prefer to hold on to U.S. government debt is that it's easy for transactions, and then there's an interest on it. Now, imagine if you're Apple, and Apple today has about $1.4 billion of cash. Now, what do you do with it? If you put it in the bank, let's say Bank of America, what if tomorrow Bank of America closed, right? Cannot get the money out. And then if you open a saving account or a checking account with Bank of America, they will pay you a 0% interest rate. That's not good, right? So what you can do, instead of giving money to Bank of America, your companies can use the cash to purchase our U.S. government debt. And then usually they pay a higher interest rate. So right now the 10-year note pays about 3.25% interest rate on it. So it's better than 0%. And our government always pay the money back on time. So there's no risk of very little risk of default. Okay. Now your other countries such as China, Japan, they're also holding on to U.S. government debt. Now they're holding on to that for different reasons. We're going to talk about those in another chapter. Okay. All right. All right, last chart for this chapter. So how much debt that's holding on to by the foreigners has been increasing for the last 20 some years. One reason is because our trade deficit. So because we're buying so much goods from other countries, that those countries have extra dollar left over, they don't know what to do with them, and that's why they lend it back to U.S. government. So that's one of the biggest reasons why that the foreign ownership of debt has been increasing for the last 20 years. But those will be covering different chapters. All right, guys. So let's end it here. If you have any question, let me know. I will see you for next chapter. Okay. Bye bye.